fluoridation gamble. We have 2 chapters of this in a book I've just written called The Case Against Fluoride. The fluoridation gamble is that fluoride could be damaging the growing tooth cells to the point that the enamel, when it finally erupts through the gums, is mottled or discolored. That this damage could be occurring to the growing tooth cells. And in a most recent study, incidentally, there are 400 genes which have been played around with when this is happening. That's the latest research. About 400 genes have been switched on during this process, or they're up or down regulated. That nothing else was happening to any other tissue in the growing child's body. That was a gamble, that you could do this to the teeth without doing any damage to the bone, without doing any damage to the brain, and so on. And now it's becoming clear that that is not the case. The teeth are a window into what is happening to the bones. We have a study from Mexico, for example, which shows in a high fluoridated area that there's a very strong correlation between the severity of dental fluorosis, which gives you a marker of how much fluoride the kid was exposed to before their permanent teeth had erupted, and the occurrence of bone fractures in those children as recorded in the local clinics. And the graphs show just that, that as the severity of dental fluorosis goes up, so the frequency of bone fractures in both children and adults also goes up. As far as the brain is concerned, that's even more disturbing. We now have 80 animal studies which indicate that fluoride damages animal brains of animals. In fact, one study showed that if rats were given 1 part per million fluoride for 1 year in their drinking water, the same level that we have in the water here in Pensacola, that they have kidney damage, brain damage, which you could see in the microscope, a greater uptake of aluminum into the brain, and beta amyloid deposits which have been associated with Alzheimer's disease. Now, that's just one study. We also have 23 studies which indicate an association between moderate exposure to fluoride and lowering of IQ in children. 23 studies. Most of them from China, but 1 from India, 1 from Iran, and 1 from Mexico. Now again, why on earth would you gamble the possible saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface if you run the risk of lowering the IQ of your children? It doesn't make sense. One of the extraordinary things about, again, the poor science which has gone on for years and years and years on this issue, once the US Public Health Service had determined that they were going to promote fluoridation and told everybody it was safe, they've had no inclination to do the solid scientific studies to track our health. The most basic studies have not been done in the United States, and they haven't been done in any of the other fluoridated countries, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Ireland. They've done no health studies in Ireland. They've done practically no health studies in Canada, practically none in Australia, and just 1 or 2 in New Zealand. And so that their attitude is, if you don't look, you don't find. But what we have to make sure to tell people is the absence of study does not mean the absence of harm. And when I say they haven't done the most basic studies, I really mean that. They haven't been collecting the fluoride levels in our bones, even though they know it accumulates in our bones. They haven't collected the fluoride levels in our urine or our blood in a systematic way to see how much the variation is in exposure in the population. They haven't used the fact that dental fluorosis and the severity of dental fluorosis is a very convenient and easy biomarker of exposure to fluoride by children, and they could be using that biomarker in a whole series of epidemiological studies with children to investigate the things which have been suggested might be related to fluoride in children. Lowering of IQ is an obvious one. Onset of puberty is another. Melatonin levels is another. Bone fractures is another. They are simply not using this obvious, completely obvious biomarker for epidemiological studies. There's been no attempt to see if there's an association with arthritis and living in a fluoridated community for X number of years, even though they know that the first symptoms of fluoride's damage to the bones is just like arthritis. So it's extraordinary. If this was any other chemical things which would have happened on a routine basis. But no, in this particular case, fluoride is a protected pollutant, and fluoridation is a protected practice. And I'm sad to say, for some bureaucrats, it's more important right now to protect the practice of fluoridation than it is to protect the health of the American people. And that's a sad thing to have to say. So you've got people running for office, you've got young and old, you've got a whole mix of people. Don't get hung up on the politics, just focus on stopping poisoning yourselves, your babies, your children, your old people. Get the fluoride out of your water, out of your babies, out of your body.